Warning, slight gore. Are you done? Uraka raised her head for the 9th time and sighed hopelessly. Forcing a smile on her face, she then turned to face Lady Yuri, who was slightly lecturing with an annoying expression. Not yet, ma'am, Uraka said softly and apologetically. She went back to her work of arranging the sheets of Lady Yuri's bed. This time she worked faster, not wanting to upset the noble again. Uraka then went on to arrange the pillows, and once she was done, she patted them and faced Lady Yuri again. I'm done, Lady Yuri, said Lady sighed expectantly and pushed herself off the chair, then raised a hand to shoo Uraka. Now, get out. Uraka nodded, then bent down to gather the dirty sheets and made her way out of Lady Yuri's chambers. The buzzing sound of people talking and walking all over the halls filled Uraka's ears as soon as she got outside. She walked, careful not to bump into the nobles. Some of their children were running around, and Uraka had to go around, careful not to collide with them, sighing once again. She continued to make her way through the order to wash the dirty clothes. Uchako-chan! Uraka suddenly stopped and turned to see her friend, walking up to her. Suyu-chan! Asui Suyu, a fellow servant of Uraka. She was of the same age and shares a room with Uraka in the servants' quarters, and she's become a dear friend of Uraka ever since she started. Are you feeling all right? Asui asked, stopping beside Uraka. The brown-haired woman nodded. Yes, why do you ask? You've been sighing a lot lately. I guess working with the other nobles is not to your liking, Asui said as the two continued to walk. Am I really that obvious? Uraka laughed nervously. I guess I got too used to serving Her Majesty, and she's very kind and patient. Is that so? I saw her a couple of times before, but I've never got to talk to her. I should introduce you to her soon, when she gets back, of course. That is, if she comes back. Of course she will. Well, Asui smiled. For the time being, you're stuck with serving the others. Yes, some are giving me a hard time since I couldn't complain. But I shouldn't complain. As the two continued to walk, Asui offered to help Uraka with the cloths, but the brown-haired woman kindly declined. Uraka knows Asui also has a lot of work to do. She doesn't want to add more to her pile. Everyone seems to be whispering a lot lately. What do you think happened? Asui said, observing the nobles gathering in their own circles and whispering to each other. I have no idea. Uraka was preoccupied in her own hopelessness earlier that she didn't notice the nobles had started passing one another gossip again. Uraka-san, I almost said Usui, Asui-san. All of a sudden, Midoriya came running in to Uraka. She noticed that Midoriya had a wide smile on his face and seemed to be excited. Midoriya-chan, how many times have I told you to call me Su-chan? The green-haired scholar laughed apologetically while scratching his head. Yes, Su-chan. What is it, Deku-kun? Uraka asked Midoriya, seeing that he clearly had something to say, and Uraka could only hope it would be good news. We received a letter from Magnus this morning, Midoriya said. Uraka gasped. Don't tell me. Midoriya nodded, his mouth curving into a big smile once again. Her Majesty is coming back. And Magnus, if the king dies without an heir, the throne will go to the queen. Every time Yin closes her eyes, she would remember her father's words. Their exclaim from that night would occur and play in her mind over and over again. It sounded like Yin is confused by her father's motives by now. Many times she'd remember and ponder on their conversations, but no. Yin understood her father's motives very well. I'm going to butcher the name, but a coup d'etat. Yin knows her father wants her to start a coup against her husband, to overthrow him by any means and to ascend to his throne. When Yin was enlightened of it, she was hesitant, but her father was quick to make her realize how a coup can save everyone from the violent rule of King Bakugou Katsuki. With that, Yin finally have something she can hang on. She suddenly found more courage and made a decision of finally coming back. And now she knows exactly what she has to do. "We are here, Your Majesty," Three Knocks retorted, and Yin looked outside. Yin remembered this moment very well. She remembers how she overlooked the palace when she arrived in Igneous. She remembered how she was escorted inside the palace, where she was met with the nobles and was led to the king. Now, Yin is reliving that moment. The only difference is before, Yin was obvious, and all other of the clouds of finally being able to marry and becoming queen. Now, she came back without the foolish smile she once wore, while resigning in her old self for being so naive. She came back, knowing a new expression, different than how she was before. "Your Majesty." Also, what's different is that it wasn't Midoriya who came to escort her. Instead, it was a guard. "Everyone is ready to meet you now," the guard said as he raised himself after bowing. Yin nodded and went on. The serf escorted her inside, where they entered a room, and Yin was met with the same people that met her on her first arrival. It was a pity to see them express in such concerned faces, still believing the story that her husband inflicted. Their concern for their queen, who they thought was kidnapped and traumatized, broke Yin's heart. She wished she could tell them the truth. As soon as Yin passed through the crowd of nobles, she came face to face with the doors that led to the room where her husband was currently in. Yin intertwined her hands together and squeezed them so tight while mustering up all of her courage. The guards then opened the door and stepped in. Her Majesty, Queen Yin. Yin let out a long breath, raised her head, and did not dare to fake a smile. She remained her blank face. She took slow but big steps, and every time she did so, she prepared herself to face him. Her husband is on the throne. He sat in a carefree way as his eyes followed her. He held an unmoving expression, however Yin knows that he was enjoying this. What Bakugou wants is for Yin to surrender and devote herself entirely to him. He wants everything but her to be an obedient, pretty wife she was made to be. With her going back means that Yin couldn't do anything to save Magnus, and her only option left is to go back to him. Yin knows it, gave him much delight and more sense of power over her. Yin made one last step, and now she faced her husband. He stood and marched to her, and for the sake of protocol and publicly, Bakugou offered a hand, and Yin took it, reluctantly. He then started to lead her to her throne. As they got there, Yin and Bakugou faced the crowd that have gathered for the arrival of their queen. "Smile, woman. Those idiots could realize something was wrong if you don't." Yin looked at her husband, her gaze boring in his head, as if she's trying to drill a hole in there. Then she smirked. "Of course, Your Majesty." He looked at her for a moment before clicking his tongue, then he turned. He may think he has more power over her now, and Yin would like him to think that. What he doesn't know is that Yin no longer felt chained up by him, and now she has something to fight for. It won't be long before all the power goes to the queen. The woman in a red dress. For the first time, Yin saw the portrait of a woman in red. It's one of the portraits hung on the walls of the palace. All the portraits are hung in the hall where everyone could see them and admire. As everyone stared at the portraits, they smiled and remembered how great the people were in the portraits. But this one, the portrait of the woman in a red dress,
is different. It was not hung with the other portraits. Rather, it was separated and was placed in a cold hallway where people could rarely pass. It was a neglected portrait, but Yin took her time to admire it. The portrait of the woman in a red dress is a portrait of Bakugou's previous wife. Oi, what are you doing here? Yin heard his voice and didn't bother to turn to see who it is. Admiring this masterpiece? Yin answered her husband. She then heard his footsteps stop beside her. This thing is an eyesore. I don't get what you saw in this.
I don't get what you didn't see in this. I find this portrait quite powerful.
Bakugou narrowed his eyes. Believe me, Sparkles, I saw some fucked up shit going on with that portrait and the person in it.
Well, I quite like it. She continued to look at the portrait, and a long pause enveloped the two. Yen slowly turned her head to steal a glance at him. When she did, she saw that Bakugou was slowly looking at anywhere but the portrait. He refuses to look at it. Yen hummed to herself and looked back at the portrait. If you hate it, why don't you put it down? Yen asked, referring to the portrait.
Glitterfuck insisted that we shouldn't put it down. I don't know what kind of shit he's pulling, but he said this thing is a part of our history.
Is that so? Yin looked at him again. But you say you are a king. You can do whatever you want. Why would you listen to Priest Ayama?
Bakugou suddenly looked at her with a glance. This thing has another purpose too.
And what is it?
It's a warning, he stated, that whoever tried to do what she did will find their head separated from their body.
Few days since Yin's arrival in Igneous, everyone had noticed how the queen had been so quiet lately. They began whispering to each other. Some tried to consult and talk to her. But Yin kept her blank face and only smiled a little to assure the people. Most of her time was spent in her chambers, and she limits her interactions from everyone as much as possible. But being the queen, that's really hard to do. She has duties after all. One day, she was told that Igneous had successfully acquired a territory from Glacia, and to celebrate the victory, a party will be held. Yin remembered the last time she attended one of those parties. It didn't go so well. It's good to be back. Uraka smiled as she continued to dress Yen. Currently, Yen is getting ready. Was it that bad? I prefer working with you, Your Majesty. I get to enjoy my work like this. Good to hear. Yen let herself give a small smile as Uraka finished dressing her. Soon she was working on her hair and powdered her face a little. Now, Yen is completely ready. Let's go. As soon as Yen arrived at the party, she was met with so much people. She also saw that general and other high-ranking soldiers were present. They all saw her and bowed. After that, she made her way to her husband in their table. It was Kirishima who gave a speech about their victory. Everyone cheered and smiled at Bakugou. Yin forced a small smile on her face when all eyes were on them. Yin noticed that the soldiers weren't that happy, especially their general, Shoto Aizawa. Well, Yin couldn't blame them. War is harsh, and who knows how much comrades they lost in order to achieve victory. Soon everyone went on the feast. They also started to wander around and mingle with each other. Bakugou left their table and went to Kirishima and his friends. Your Majesty. Yin turned to see a noblewoman with long dark hair. She recognized her as Lady Nirumi Kayami. She's also around the palace as Midnight. Yin nodded to acknowledge her. Call me Yin, please, she suggested, since Midnight is much more older than her. How nice of you, dear. Midnight smiled and went to sit beside Yin. I heard what happened. Yin gave a small nervous smile at the topic. It must have been so scary Being lost in that place? The forest here in Igneous is not exactly kind. I've experienced, and I can't agree more. As much as it pains Yin, she has to play along with the lies. And God, those bandits! They dare to harm our queen. They don't know what's coming to them. It's a good thing that your husband came to take care of them. Midnight went on. Yin nodded slowly. Yes, I'm very fortunate. Anyways, Midnight leaned in. How is your relationship with him? Have you communicated your marriage yet? Yin was caught off guard by the sudden question. She blinked, with her mouth agape. Not yet. Is that so? Midnight leaned back. It's best if you do it soon. This kingdom awaits an heir. Yes, of course. Yin nodded to reassure her, although not sure that an heir will suddenly arrive so soon. After all, she still shares a conflict with her husband. Everyone, gather around. Kirishima's voice rang through and everyone focused their attention on him. She looked to see that the red-haired man is standing while Bakugou sat beside him, but she noticed that Kirishima has been fidgeting and looked nervous. He kept glancing at Bakugou. Yin also knows that Kirishima is hesitant, and she does not know where the hesitation is coming from. But she sat still to find out. As all of you know, he started as soon as everyone went quiet. Glacia is one kingdom that we didn't expect to become our enemy. Another glance at Bakugou. We also didn't expect that they could colonize a couple of our territories, but now His Majesty has put it all into getting them back. Our lands is our glory, and we can't just let other kingdoms invade it. It was all thanks to our king that we are slowly retaining our glory. His Majesty led thousands of igneous soldiers and pushed back the glacier soldiers. In the end, we were successful in taking one of our territories. Inside, she wondered why her husband didn't do the speech. Why is he always making Kirishima do the talking? And now, Kirishima trailed, looking worried by the moment. Yin is confused as to why he looks like that. Suddenly, a servant came to a trolley. On the trolley was a silver platter covered by a cloth. Yin's eyes followed the trolley closely. It stopped in the center of the room. By now, everyone is interested. She looked at Kirishima, who worriedly looked at the plate. Yin narrowed her eyes and looked at Bakugou, who sat in a relaxed manner. But Yin looked closely and noticed a glint in his eyes. Morning, Gore, right now. To our victory, Kirishima continued. His Majesty brought his trophy. On cue, the servant took the cloth off the plate. When the content was displayed, everyone gave off noises of shock. Dear Lord, oh my God, what the hell? Yin froze in her seat as her eyes trained on the thing that sat atop the silver platter. It was a head. A severed head on a silver platter. Yin stared at it wide, unblinking eyes, its mouth wide open, as if it was just screaming from pain, possibly from the pain of having its head cut off from its body. Its face contorted into a whole agonizing expression, a scene itself so brutal and terrifying. Kirishima gulped and collected himself to make the final announcement. The head of Glacia's war general. Uraka knew from the queen's faraway look that she was disturbed and horrified. She heard from the servants that they were made to clean after the celebration, that something disturbing was present at that night. Uraka almost puked when one of the servants explained how the head looked like. She thanked God that she decided to wait for the queen in her chambers last night, or else
She would have seen that graphic display. Your Majesty, your lunch is ready, Uraka announced as soon as she walked in and sat the tray of food on the table in the Queen's chambers. On the table, the breakfast was delivered this morning and was still there, untouched. She refused to get dressed and go out ever since this morning, so Uraka had to deliver her food inside. Uraka remembered that last night, Yin came back in her chambers absolutely terrified. She didn't utter a single word, and would only stare into empty space. Uraka even checked on her every now and then to see if she was still blinking, and Yin hadn't slept since last night. Uraka was worried, so she decided to stay in her chambers to look out for her while she laid there, still, in nothing. Your Majesty? She called again, and then got no response from her. This morning, Yin had managed to move from her bed to sit on a chair that faced the window, and now she hasn't moved since. Uraka sighed hopelessly. She's really worried right now. Your Majesty, please, you have to eat, Uraka said worriedly. You need to take care of yourself because you still have more. Uraka. The brown-haired servant blinked, and her worries were decreased while the Queen uttered a word. What is it, Your Majesty? Yin slowly turned her head and stared at her dead in the eyes. When she did, Uraka saw the Queen's eyes no longer stared so far away. Instead, it held such fiery determination. And that's when Uraka knew that she was to brace herself for what she was about to say. I have decided to start a cope.